So as you've been hearing a lot about the elections, the developments around the political parties and the electorate, but what about process and procedure? So as South Africans prepare themselves for yet again to exercise their right to vote, this time there are new norms brought forth by the global pandemic, COVID-19. There are, however, certain norms that remain unchanged, which include the process of voting. Ebrahim Fakir is the director of programs at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute, and he speaks to us to guide us through the voting election day, how it works and what we should be looking out for. Ebrahim, very good evening to you. Always a pleasure. So let's just start with the voters' roll. I know you often hear political parties complain about people who should not be there and they're being there seemingly to boost numbers of the incumbent. Does that process lend itself at any time to being fiddled with on voting day, or it should not even be an issue?
No, not in South Africa. It should not be an issue. And in South Africa, the issue of people appearing on the voters' roll who should not be on the voters' roll has not been a big feature, unlike countries like Zimbabwe, for example, where people who've passed on, people who are under 18, people who are not eligible to be on the voters' roll find themselves on. What we do have, however, Tsepiso, in South Africa is the problem of people being put on voters' roll in segments of the voters' roll where they don't belong. Now, remember in Tlokwe, in Potchefstroom, in the Northwest Province, the whole series of court cases which started because political parties misbehaved and moved people in to vote in an area where they aren't ordinarily allowed to vote. So that kind of thing does happen, where people appear on segments of a voters' roll to stack voters for a particular party's preference. And there was a court case which then necessitated that the IEC, and placed a great onerous burden on the IEC, that all registrations must now be attached to an address to try and alleviate that problem. So it's created a massive administrative hurdle, and thankfully the IEC has in fact reached a large portion of the target of registering people with addresses. Our fear at the time was that, this ruling actually could potentially disenfranchise a lot of voters, because many who live in informal settlements would be hard-pressed to provide an address, but some creative solution has in fact been found. And so that's not a big problem, number one. Number two, the voters' roll is always open for inspection in terms of the electoral calendar, and every citizen, including all political parties and contesting candidates, have the right, in terms of the law, to inspect the voters' roll and raise objections should they so wish. So I don't think it's a major problem.
I'm glad you raised that, because my other question was going to be around the fact that in the past there have been complaints of people who were voting at voting stations where they shouldn't be, and I wanted to find out from you about the prospect of fudging figures by doing that. Apart from a special application or an application for a special vote, should there be a legitimate reason for that occurrence in particularly the local government elections?
No, in a local government election, you're not entitled to vote wherever you like. In a national election, because the entire country is a constituency, and because it's a pure proportional representation election, at least until now, well, see what happens when Parliament comes up with a new sort of system for elections, for national and provincial elections. Until thus far, you could vote on the PR ballot nationally anywhere in the country. For the provincial ballot, you had to be anywhere in the province in which you reside or in which you are registered, right? So it makes sense, because anywhere in the province is counted towards that PR ballot, so it's allowed. For a national and provincial election, that's one thing. Anywhere in the country on a national PR ballot, you are entitled to vote. For the provincial portion, you must be anywhere in the province where you are registered. For a local government election, you have to be in the ward or the municipality, and preferably the ward where you are registered. And you must, of course, be in the voting district in the ward where you are registered in order to vote, because it's a local government election. You are electing representatives for your municipality. Why, if I live in Johannesburg, would I be electing or wanting to elect representatives for Tshwane or for Pretoria, unless, of course, I want to be naughty and political parties want to incentivize that, because we know as a party we might have more voters in this area and less in that area, so we want to bulk it up, we want to move voters across. The systems are very much in place, the architecture is very much in place. All infractions happen because of misbehavior by parties and misbehavior by their supporters. And that's what we need to watch out for.
Okay. I mean, a lot of these allegations are born also out of ignorance of electoral law, process and procedure. Now, in the past, we've also heard reports of boxes of ballot papers that were dumped, and along with it, claims of vote rigging. What is the process and procedure of storing voting material, and can it be used to rig votes if those are not particularly stamped or inked in any way, or end up in a place where they can be counted?
Look, I often say in South Africa, it's either very easy or it's very hard. Either one. It's either very easy or it's very hard. But it's very easy provided you have crooked electoral officials. And it's very hard because the systems and the oversight and regulatory architecture is very well structured, is very much in place, and the oversight mechanisms are in there. So remember, in the last elections, there were accusations that a whole lot of ballots were found lying around and discarded and weren't counted. It then took one of the other political party leaders to call in and say, our voting and our party agents can verify that these were in fact counted. There were other accusations that ballot papers were found lying around. It was true, ballot papers were found lying around, but those were sample ballot papers which didn't have the official stamp at the back. So here's the safeguards. Every ballot paper has a serial number. Every ballot paper has a stamp at the back, number one. Number two, all ballots and ballot boxes have a seal which is made in front of party agents and then opened also in front of party agents. Third, all party agents have a right to observe the counting of the ballots and have a right to sign off on the results slip. And by law, the results slip have to be posted outside each voting station. Those are the safeguards, and that's built into law. But Tsepiso, the agency here rests with party agents and with political parties. If you wish to scupper the process and if you wish to raise spurious objections, then you deliberately don't send the party agents. Of course, it's true some parties don't have the extensive personnel support base to be able to have party agents, number one. And number two, we're in current conditions of COVID where it's going to be difficult for all voting stations to accommodate party agents on an extensive basis because of social distancing protocols. Okay. However, the IEC has reached, I think, accommodation with many political parties. And secondly, there's these party liaison committees where all of these decisions are subjected to. Now, if parties don't participate in those liaison committees, well, that's a different story.
All right. Just finally, is there anything that you see as having the potential for intrigue in these elections, whether it's more hung municipalities because of more independent candidates, our current socio-economic circumstances, or the voter turnout itself?
Look, any of those are possible. And like I say, it's very hard to rig the election, but it can also be very easy provided you've got recalcitrant electoral officials, number one. Number two, on the voter turnout, we never know. There's a level of apathy, there's a level of anger, and it's driven. This apathy is not driven because people are disinterested. People feel that the institutions don't work for them, that the process is not working for them. And so the crisis is a crisis of credibility, not a crisis of apathy. Number two, so we don't know whether that is going to affect turnout or not. But on the converse, there are people who are angry, people who believe they want to come out to punish one or other party, and therefore may decide to come out to vote. So anyone, it's anyone's guess what turnout's going to be like. About hung municipalities, again, people say the future's coalitions. Well, we don't know. Let voters tell you. When voters tell you and the results are in, then we'll know. And then we'll know whether the parties have the maturity to negotiate on a set of principles, on a basis of a fidelity to principles, for what they want to do once they get into power to exercise public authority. So all of those things, it's almost impossible to tell now. But yes, there's a major number, an exponential increase in the number of independent candidates who are standing. But let's be clear, the independent candidates are also standing because of a crisis of representation in political parties. Sometimes it's fallouts and fractional battles inside parties which spur people to stand as independents. And largely, there's this global crisis of credibility inside parties where people believe, gosh, parties aren't responsive, they aren't accountable, they aren't doing what they said they would do once they are in power. Maybe I should try my luck as a candidate. So that's why we have a rise of independent candidates, because of the crisis inside political parties.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, Ebrahim, and hopefully looking forward to hearing more from you as these votes get counted and these developments occur. Ebrahim Fakir, Director of Programs at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute.